Good morning. Welcome to Beverly Unitarian Church. I'm David Schwartz, the minister here, and it is a pleasure to join you virtually this morning. I've come back into this empty building to record a couple of pieces of the service today because I miss this place. On the one hand, church is the people, not the place, and on the other hand, I miss being here with all of you. In this congregation, we welcome all people, every color of the rainbow from every place on earth. And whatever your past is like, whatever this present moment is like for you right now, we invite you to walk into the future with us. Here we celebrate a diversity of beliefs, striving always to make space for more. Like other Unitarian Universalist congregations, we aren't united because we all believe a specific list of orthodoxies or creeds, but instead, because we share the same values, the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism, and we share the same mission to grow our spirits and to help heal the world. We especially welcome visitors in this online church experience. I hope that you'll stick around after the service today. We gather for a Zoom video coffee hour. The link's in your email if you've got it. Chat in the chat box as the service unfolds in this next 45 minutes. It's good to be together. The order of service does not exist this morning. Instead, look to your weekly email for announcements, and if you have announcements to share, send them in to Mary in the church office. You can take a look on the website, both to learn more about us and what's going on in general, but also to get in touch with her. We're not all together, but we still are doing all sorts of things in the life of the congregation. And this is a time to gather differently, not just to stop. I invite you now to prepare your heart and mind for worship and be together. Harp. 800 years ago, the Jewish philosopher and rabbi Maimonides is said to have written that hope is the belief in the plausibility of the possible, as opposed to the necessity of the probable. Hope is the belief in the plausibility of the possible, that possibilities really could happen, as opposed to the necessity, the inevitability, the certainty of the probable, of the likely outcome. A belief in the plausibility of the possible. We are a people of hope, even when it's difficult. We're a people working to imagine a different way of being and live and act and be our way into that, individually and all together in the city and the nation and the world. We believe in the plausibility of the possible, even when it doesn't seem too likely. Our mission, my friend and colleague and mentor, the Reverend Victoria Safford, says our mission is to plant ourselves at the gates of hope. To plant ourselves right there at the gates of hope, not the prudent gates of optimism, which are narrower, not the stalwart, boring gates of common sense, not the strident gates of self-righteousness, which creak on shrill hinges. People can't hear us there. They can't pass through. Our mission is not to plant ourselves at the cheerful, flimsy garden gate of everything is going to be all right. Our mission, our work, is to plant ourselves at a different, sometimes lonely place, a place of truth-telling about your own soul, first of all, and its condition. A place of resistance and defiance. The piece of ground from which you see the world both as it is and as it could be, as it will be. The place from which you glimpse not only struggle, but the joy of struggle. That's the gates of hope, and we stand there beckoning and calling, telling people what we're seeing, asking people what they see through those gates. That's our mission, to be a people of hope. And it takes work. It's hard, and it is easy to lose that thread. Thank goodness, thank God, thank life itself that we are not in this alone, but together. And every time we lose that hope, we have the strength of other people to tell us what they're seeing. My hope is restored and strengthened and comes alive when I hear from you, from others, how they're doing and what they see. Join me in lighting a chalice for hope. We're people of hope, and that takes work. And work is hard, and that's okay. Will you join in the words of our covenant? Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. I invite you in the chat to greet each other with the brightness and sunshine of the spring that is finally here. Even if we don't get to all see it together, we all get to see it and we all get to be together. Dude, you're just in the way right now. Here, sit down. Oh, there you go, buddy. Oh, that's a good dog. Good springtime. Oh, Pilot, you sat on the book. The book is directly under you. Dude, the book is under your butt. Come on. There we go. All right, that was kind of successful. The book today is called Could Be Worse by James Stevenson. Pilot, could things be worse? Things are really nice right now, so they could be worse. Could Be Worse by James Stevenson. At Grandpa's house, things were always the same. Grandpa always had the same thing for breakfast. Every day he read the paper. And he always said the same thing. Could be worse. Grandpa, that awful dog ate this sofa cushion. Could be worse. No matter what. I got a splinter in my finger, Grandpa. It could be worse. My bike has a flat and my sneakers have a hole and I lost my kite in a tree, Grandpa. Could be worse. One day, Marianne said, "How come Grandpa never says anything interesting?" "I guess it's because nothing interesting ever happens to him," said Louie. The next morning at breakfast, Grandpa said something different. He said, "Guess what? Last night, when I was asleep, a large bird pulled me out of bed and took me for a long ride. And dropped me in the mountains. I heard a noise. It was an abominable snowman with a huge snowball, which he threw at me. was stuck inside the snowball, which rolled down the mountain. It finally landed on the desert and began to melt. I walked across the desert. Suddenly, I heard footsteps coming nearer and near. A moment later, I got squished by a giant, something or other. Before I could get up, I heard a strange noise. A great blob of marmalade was coming toward me. It chased me across the desert until I crashed into something tall. It was like an ostrich and very cross, very annoyed. It gave me a big kick. I went up into some storm clouds, almost got hit by lightning, fell out of the clouds. This is not Grandpa's usual day. What? I know, he fell out of the clouds. He's gonna be okay though. Oh, excuse me, Pilot has to sit down. Sit, buddy, get down there. Yeah, there you go. That's not super helpful right now. And landed in an ocean. I sank down about a mile or so. I saw an enormous goldfish coming at me. I swam away as fast as I could and I hid under a cup that had air in it. When it was safe, I crawled out. I started to walk, but my foot got stuck in the grip of a gigantic lobster. I didn't know what to do, but just then a big squid came along and squirted black ink all over the lobster. I escaped and hitched a ride on a sea turtle that was going to the top for a bit of sunshine. I was fortunate to find a piece of toast floating by that I rowed to shore, where I discovered a newspaper. I folded it up quickly into an airplane and flew across the sea and back home to bed. Now, what do you think of that? The kids are speechless for a moment. Could be worse. Could be worse. By James Stevenson. Pilot, what do you think about all that? Could it be worse? Sometimes hope is hard to find. Sometimes the idea that things are going to just magically get better doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Sometimes it doesn't seem like it's really true. In those moments, sometimes what I say to my dog, to my kids, to my friend is, it could be worse. Friends, I invite you to take off your masks. How are things going? Oh, okay. You can take that off. How is it being at home with kids? Oh, it's fine. How is it being at home alone? Oh, I'm doing okay. You can take those masks off. How is it with your parents in another state or your spouse or partner at risk? Oh, I'm doing fine. Take that off. Take that mask off. You don't need that right now. This community sees sorrow. And instead of trying to carry that inside each and all by ourselves, we share it with each other and make that burden a little bit easier, even just in naming it, make it easier. This community sees joy and celebration, and rather than hoarding that all to ourselves as if we would run out of celebration, we give that away too to each other. I lit a candle this morning for everyone at home, for parents and caregivers taking care of people who aren't independent themselves, for those who are isolated and who are lonely. You're not alone, we're with you. A candle for everyone at home. I light a candle for everyone in healthcare, the providers in hospitals and offices who are treating people directly, the doctors and the nurses and the technicians and the administrators and the people who are scheduling appointments and who are cleaning the buildings and cooking the food. For everyone making that possible. I light a candle this morning. A candle of joy. That spring really is coming, finally and at last. Flowers on the trees and light that stays light until a reasonable hour in the evening. A candle of joy for everyone who's finding a hope and gladness, even in the midst of all of this. I light a candle of sorrow for our losses. Not everyone will come through this time. Each of us has people we know who are sick or who are suffering, whether it's from this pandemic or not. A candle to name the reality of that sorrow and the heartache that comes with it. I light a candle of hope. Hope that the world on the other side of these days won't be the same world we left behind. This is a candle of hope for the future. This pandemic reveals the brokenness of the order of our world. It reveals the brokenness and the inequity that has always been there, but invisible to many of us. A candle of hope that the world we go back to is not the same world that we left. A candle for all those joys and sorrows that we carry silently in our hearts. A candle then for the fullness of life, for the complexity of it, for the way that joy and woe are woven fine even in our ordinary days. And a last candle of invitation. For each of you, as you'd like, to add in the chat box the names of those you'd like to lift up in the love of this community, or if you just type in I as if you're raising two fingers to light a candle in silence. A candle for all of us. And an invitation to share your joys and your sorrows, remembering that this is public. Friends, will you take a breath with me? And another. Our hope and our prayer this morning is to let this be for each of us a moment of pause. A moment to step out from ordinary time, whether that's busy or quiet. A moment to step apart from all of that, to set down just for a minute all of our fears and anxieties. They'll wait for us. Our hope and our prayer this morning is to pause and to breathe. Will you join me in singing? My life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, though far off hymn that hails the new creation. Above the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? When tyrants tremble sick with fear and hear their death knells ringing, when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? To prison cell and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are winging, when friends by shame are undefiled. How can I keep from singing? Amen. We need to mark a milestone in the life of the congregation, a milestone that starts tomorrow. You may already have seen the union signs going up, and tomorrow the scaffolding goes up and work starts on the repair and restoration of our historic building. We are at this moment through I can't even say it well enough, through the tireless, the incredible, the persistent, through the tiredness work of so many people on the task force. I want to lift them up: Adair Small and Amanda Price, Anna Carvlin, Chris Hoffman, Eileen Cleese, Francoa, Jacob First, Jean Hardy Robinson, Ken Small, Stacy Recht, Linda Lamberty, Linda Peterson, Mary Jo Viero at BAPA, and Dante Mosley at Beverly Bank, Roberta Chalmers, so many who have shown up for the meetings and jumped through every possible financial, organizational, logistical hoop that you can imagine jumping through in order to make it here. I have to think of new things to say, because for the last 2.5, almost 3 years now that I've been with you, again and again, what I've come to you to say is that moments of stress in a community are moments of fake fights and shorter tempers and less patience, and it is our community built through love and respect and relationships with each other that is the thing that is real and enduring no matter what happens with this building. For almost 3 years now, I have come to you to say, maybe we'll do this restoration and maybe we won't, but we'll be okay. And it is a privilege to come to you and say, we will do this restoration and we'll be okay. Friends, through everything that's brought us to this moment, which is by no means the end of all of the work, there is a road ahead of us still. What consistently impresses me, what I'm grateful for, what I brag about you to other ministers in Chicago, is the way that you come together. Some people, some organizations, a moment of crisis is a moment when they fall apart. Again and again, what I see in this church community is that moments of crisis, moments that test our resolve as a congregation, our ability, our organization, these are moments where you rise to the challenge so beautifully, not by pretending it's not there, but by facing it. By facing it honestly and forthright, and then rolling up your sleeves, right? And saying, all right, how are we going to tackle this thing? And then you do it. And now scaffolding goes up tomorrow. And a whole big crew of workers start disassembling stone by stone the turrets on our building and then putting them all back together, stone by stone. The work is not starting tomorrow. The work started 3 years ago, and you've been doing it this whole time. And it is really beautiful to see. It doesn't come without sweat, tears, maybe blood too. It comes from an investment of time, talent, and treasure. I'm grateful to be your pastor at this moment in the history of the congregation. This is one of those moments in congregational histories that shows up 50 years later. How a group of people gathered together and rallied around and said, we know that the church isn't the building, the church is the people, but we're caretakers and stewards of this property, and this building serves us now. So we're going to do the right thing by it and take care of it. We're in the closing days of the pledge drive right now. The pledge drive that is the commitment of financial support for the congregation in the year ahead. I want to encourage you, whatever your financial situation right now, to make that pledge. It may be that you've lost a job, that your finances are changed, that things are at risk, and it needs to be less. There's no shame or blame or guilt in that. Just submit a smaller pledge. That's fine. You're not any less welcome here because of that. It's not like printed on your name tag, not that we even have name tags right now. You belong here, period. And it may be that you're doing well, that you're secure. And what we've seen from so many folks who have made pledges already who are in that situation, which again, shouldn't surprise me anymore after being with you so long, is that people who have the means are stepping up to make it possible for all of us to be here and to stay here. So I want to encourage you, if you haven't pledged yet, make that pledge today. I want to encourage you to do this so strongly, I'm not even going to give you information about how to make a weekly offering. I'm going to say, no, go make your pledge. Go to the church website and you'll find the link there, or go to your email and you'll find information. Friends, none of us can do this life on our own. We're all in it together. And that's true in celebration, and that's true in mourning, and that's true for the high, sublime spiritual experiences, and that is true for the nitty-gritty details of fundraising and stonemasonry. Here we are, all together, all of us crew on this little ship of a church.
My life flows on in endless song above its lamentation. I hear the reel, the far off hymn that hears a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? What though the tempest round me rolls, I know the truth it liveth. What though the darkness round me close, songs in the night it giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to the rock I'm clinging. Since love prevails in heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? Tyrants tremble as they hear the bells of freedom ring. When friends rejoice for far and near, how can I keep from singing? To breeze and sand and dungeons our thoughts to wing. When friends by shame are undefiled, how can I keep flows on in endless song of its lamentation. I hear the breathe afar of him that hears a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds like a How can I keep from singing? How can I keep from singing? How can I keep from singing? How can I keep from singing?
My life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I love this old hymn in part because it doesn't pretend that things are other than what they are. There's another hymn in our hymnal, a lovely piece of music called We Sing of Golden Mornings, and it has lyrics like, we sing of hopes undaunted, of friendly ways and kind, of hearts courageous and the youthful eager mind, and that's all fine. But right now, what I need to know, what I think we need to remember, is that our lives flow on in endless song, above earth's lamentation. And both of those things are true, the song and the lamentation. Right now, what I need to know and be reminded of, and maybe you too, is that the tempest round me roars, and the darkness round me close, and no storm can shake my inmost calm, when to the rock of love I am clinging, when I hold fast to that foundation. Pete Seeger, the folk singer and Unitarian Universalist who popularized the song, wrote that if there's a world here in 100 years, it's going to be saved by tens of millions of little things. The powers that be can break up any big thing they want. They can corrupt it or co-opt it from the inside. They can attack it from the outside. But what are they going to do about 10 million little things that break up 2 of them and 3 more like them spring up? That's hope. That's what human-sized, human-scale hope looks like. 10 million little things. I've had the privilege to teach at our Unitarian Universalist seminary here in Chicago, and when I lead my classes at Meadville Lombard, one of the things I ask my students to do each semester is to write a 5-page paper on hope. I tell them to write what is the fundamental theological or philosophical or psychological source of hope from which they draw to speak to people in despair, to speak when they're despairing. I tell them, don't give me a sermon you would preach. Tell me the source you would call on. Tell me that rock that you cling to, that rock of hope, that bedrock that doesn't shake in the storm. What is that thing? Sometimes the assignment is a little bit like the old joke, the old joke about how adults ask kids what they want to be when they grow up, so that the adults can get ideas for a fresh start in their own lives, ideas for new, different careers. What do you want to be when you grow up? That sounds good. It's a sweet deal for me when my own reserves of hope are growing thin, as all of ours do sooner or later, to read a dozen people each telling me why they hope. And they say beautiful and honest and difficult things. They wrote this year that hope is a quiet thing. Hope is an ember inside. Students said, my mother taught me things to do to find hope. Hope does not just spring eternal. Someone said, hope is in the small things. and another that history teaches hope, and another that there is a love that flows through self and community and infinite, and we can take refuge in that, whether or not you can feel it, whether or not you even believe it's there on any given day. It's there to take refuge in. And a student who wrote, "I'm not a philosopher." Like, listen, buddy, I'm not making you hope flowcharts in this paper. And another who said, "I'm in the midst of despair and trauma, and yet I still get up every day." Hope, writes the poet Emily Dickinson in a piece that came up again and again as I read through these sources of hope. Hope, writes Dickinson, is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. It says something about what it is, that thing called hope. Mysterious, arriving unexpected, weak and unconquerable, both at once, perching not in our thinking minds or even in our hearts, but somewhere deeper, perching in the soul, that faculty of ours, that sense which touches, encounters, perceives mystery. Hope lives in that part of us that dwells on the wet sand between the unknown ocean of life itself and mystery and the dry ground of our known and understood lives. Hope lives before our meaning-making. There in that space between the high and low tide of the spirit is the home for hope which perches within us, fragile and indestructible. 2 years ago now, maybe 3, in what feels like another life, entirely like another country, like all of us now are immigrants from somewhere else, talking about the old place that we used to live in. 2 or 3 years ago, working in my office at First Unitarian Church of Chicago, where I'm recording right now, one of our office volunteers came in on a Thursday afternoon. Our office volunteers who guide people through this labyrinth of a building. Long time church member, pillar of this church, Madeira. She was our office volunteer that day, and she came in holding in her hands, tenderly, gently, a little bird, maybe a sparrow of some kind, a thing with feathers, which had flown full force into the window next to her and dropped to the ground, motionless and moved by compassion, not knowing if she went to this bird as nurse or as undertaker. Madeira picked it up, and finding its heart beating fast in its hand, even as its body still was stunned, motionless, still, she brought it inside to hope and wonder together at this little wild thing resting in her palm. Hope is the feeling of that moment, standing at the shoreline of mystery, woven into the fabric of all of life, a sweet song, unstopped even in the storm, a thing with feathers perching in the soul. And she took the bird back outside again and put it under a bush to hide it, hopefully, from the hawks. And when we went out later, it was gone. It would be an easier thing to tell you that life is either all good or all bad. It would be easier to tell you that I know how it all turns out in the end. Everything's going to be fine. It's more difficult, but it's a more honest answer to tell you that hoping is a complicated thing. That the seeds of possibility are here now, even if we can't see them sprouting. That another world exists inside this one, a world of justice, of compassion, and that the possibility of that future is real and isn't guaranteed and is real anyway. It's hard to tell you that hope lives inside us in a place which is felt, which is experienced, which happens before our thinking about it most of the time. That hope is a song in the storm that we are tuning our hearts to hear, that we're listening for, and that we find and lose and find and lose again and again and again. In the Christian tradition, Easter isn't a Sunday, it isn't a service, it's a season, Eastertide, a season of the church calendar, or a season of the Spirit. They're the same, maybe 50 days long. So much of what we think of as Christianity today is innovations that happened long after the death of Jesus. Lent, Advent, these things don't come till later, but the Easter season, the season of hoping, when hope is hard to find, was celebrated among the very earliest church. And I wonder what that must have felt like, what hope must have felt like for those earliest followers of Jesus before there was such a thing as Christians in the months that followed the death of their teacher, their rabbi, who had preached love, who had preached a radical acceptance, the one who taught and healed and actually, in fact, the story says, created a community where everyone counted and everyone mattered, judged on the content of their character with abounding grace. When this teacher, who had opened, who had showed them the world inside of this one, the world that was possible, the life that was possible, died, the season that followed was one of uncertainty as much of a season of hope. These people knew another way of living and life was possible, knew that like a nesting doll there was inside of us and this life a world founded and rooted and growing from compassion and community. And when I think of that place and the one we're in now too, there's wisdom in a season for hoping. For them, just like for us, resolve must have come and gone as the weather changes, and suddenly it's snowing again, and there's a freeze warning in May, apparently. May! And the seeds were growing for them, each sprouting on their own time. Hope doesn't come just because it's 10:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning, not for you, not for me. They and we kept on singing the world they dreamed of. The people they were, beloved exactly as we are, and all of us needing a little bit of work too. The writer E.B. White, in his later years, received a letter from someone despairing of the state of the world, and believing that the work of a writer included speaking a word of courage, an uplift. When folks were in despair, this is what E.B. White wrote in response in the language of his day. He said, "Dear Mr. Nadeau, as long as there is one upright man, as long as there is one compassionate woman, the contagion may spread, and the scene is not desolate. Hope is the thing that is left to us in a bad time. I shall get up Sunday morning and wind the clock as a contribution to order and steadfastness." He continues, he says, "Sailors have an expression about the weather. They say, the weather is a great bluffer. I guess the same is true of our human society. Things can look dark, then a break shows in the clouds, and all is changed, sometimes rather suddenly. It's quite obvious that the human race has made a queer mess of life on this planet. But as people, we probably harbor seeds of goodness that have lain for a long time, waiting to sprout when the conditions are right. Man's curiosity, his relentlessness, his inventiveness, his ingenuity have led him into deep trouble. We can only hope that these same traits will enable him to claw his way out. Hang on to your hat. Hang on to your hope. And wind the clock, for tomorrow is another day. Sincerely, E.B. White. Hang on to your hat. Hang on to your hope. And wind the clock, for tomorrow is another day. Friends, our service is over and the work begins again. To be a people planted by the gates of hope, speaking a good word each to the other, telling what we see and asking what you see. Our service is ended, and our work begins again. Go in peace, and amen.